Hi folks, David Watts here. Another video for you. This time a review of the Fujifilm XF80mm 2.8 macro lens. And we'll be using Luminar to do the review in the sense of looking at images and so forth. So we'll also throw in a little bit of Luminar technique if that is helpful. Hope these videos are helpful to you if you're a Fujifilm fan like I am. I hope this might answer some questions about the 80mm macro lens, the brand new lens that Fuji just released. Specifically, what I'm looking at today is, can this lens be an excellent choice for portraits? I don't really do any macro photography. I'm going to assume it's a great lens for macro work. Let's just accept that. The question is, can it be a good portrait type lens? Some people say no. Some say it's too sharp. Well, I've had the lens for a couple of weeks. I've used it on location in New York City with a couple of models, nighttime photo shoot, and I wanted to show you my results. Now, I don't like videos that take forever, to lead up to a final answer. So here's the top level, didn't have time to read or didn't have time to listen kind of answer. I think it's a great lens. It's not perfect. No lens is, of course. I think it is a very capable lens for portrait work, especially in certain circumstances, and maybe with a couple of caveats. Let me back up though. I've got an image on the screen, but in just a moment we'll dive into some of these images. There are great choices for portrait lenses in the Fujifilm system. So 56mm, the f1.2 is probably the most well known. I think that's a perfect lens, especially if you're doing a lot of indoor portrait type work where you don't have a lot of space. With the f1.2, you can completely obliterate the background. But it's a pretty short depth of field, and if you focus on the model's eye, their ear, or even somewhere halfway between their eye and their ear, may be out of focus. I think a lot of people probably use it at f2.0 for average cases, and in that case, the 50mm f2.0 may be an excellent choice for a lot less money and faster focusing and weather resistant. So, but if you're doing indoor portrait work, if space is a little bit tight, if you've generally got some decent lighting, although with the 56 and the f1.2 you can really crank that aperture open and absorb a lot of light. But anyway, that's a great indoor sort of portrait, tight space portrait lens in my judgment. I don't have the 56, I've played with it just a bit, but that's my impression of it. I have the 90mm f2, fabulous lens. If you've got a bit more space, especially if you do more outdoor portrait work, outstanding. F2.0, perfect, blurs the background, really fabulous. I don't think I'll ever get rid of my 90mm, at least I hope I don't. What I have done more of lately is nighttime portrait type work. I love the nighttime look. You'll see this image on the screen. Outdoors, this is in Times Square. I mean, there are 10,000 people around us. I love that sort of portrait work using available light. The 90mm is fantastic, but the lack of image stabilization hurts. You're going to have to be, a 1/125th of a second, or even closer to 2/50th of a second. You're starting to push beyond ISO 4000, 5000, up to maybe 6400. Look, the Fujifilms do great with high ISO, but you're going to get some noise and it's going to be tough. So enter the 80mm with image stabilization. And that's the situation I've been using in nighttime portrait type photography. I think it does a great job for that. A couple of caveats, we'll get into that as we look at some of the images. So here's an image I took again with this model in New York City. This is right in Times Square. This is using the 80mm. Got it wide open f2.8. This is ISO 2500. I think the shutter speed was about a 60th of a second. You can get great crisp shots at that relatively slow speed, even 1/30th of a second. In this case, working with a model, if the model moves, you'll have an issue, but both my models in this case were pretty good. So if we just do a quick 100% view, nice crispness on the eyes. You've got a lot of sharpness, even little points of glitter. This may not be as sharp as it gets. We'll look at each of the images this way. Again, there's a little bit of variation here for the models breathing or moving with some of these slower shutter speeds. But what I like about this lens is the fact that even though it's 80mm, it's kind of tight. That's about a 120mm in a full frame equivalent. It allows enough of the background through at f2.8. It obviously creates some nice bokeh, but it allows enough of it through to give you a little sense or a hint of what's going on behind, and I'll show that in a couple of the images, but you can get a bit of a sense of it. There's a bit of a cityscape behind the model. There's activity, there's lights, you can even make out a little bit of people on the legs. So anyway, I like that for that effect. Now the question is it too sharp? Again, might have been a little movement here on the part of the model, but it is a very sharp lens in general. I don't think it's too sharp for portrait work. Here's what I would do with that. I would prefer a lens that's very, very crisp and very sharp, and then let me decide as the photographer, hopefully as the artist, let me decide what I want to do about the sharpness. Maybe I want to do a little bit of skin smoothing and tone that down a bit. Here's what I typically do in Luminar. I use Luminar because I can get great results faster than anything else. So in Luminar, I use this structure filter, and I usually just start off about halfway, and in terms of toning down the structure. And you'll notice right away that had an impact. Let's turn the structure off, and you can see the sharpness, and would turn that filter back on. Now, of course, that applies to the entire image, so it's very easy to use this brush and to come in here, and we'll tone down the size of the brush just a bit, and then just paint where we want the skin smoothing effect. And if you do nothing else, if you have a decent shot, a good image that you've crafted, and if you do nothing else, then just a little bit of skin smoothing with this one filter, structure, and just tone it down just a little bit, you'll have some really nice results. You can do more. There's a soft focus filter. There's a little bit of a glow sort of filter. You can play with those. I often find that I get all the skin smoothing effect I need or want with just that single that single filter there. So again, let's look at before and after. All right, so what this allows us to do is keep a lot of sharpness in her hair, but still soften the skin. What some folks might like to do is bump up the clarity just a bit, and that'll increase some of the micro contrast. It may require, if you do it like I did, now the clarity filter is going to be applied first, and then the structure filter will be applied sort of on top of that. It may require you to come back and just increase or decrease that structure a little bit more to regain some of the softness you want. But I love images where we've got real sharp details, but a nice, soft, flattering skin, especially for female models. Okay, let's look at some other examples. That was 4819. Let me go down here and we'll check out this one here. Here's one where you may can see a little bit of extra sharpness. Again, she was leaning up against a wall. This is right in Times Square, close to where there's sort of, close to that New York City police station. There's a bit of an American flag, sort of an LED panel there. And this is where we were. So some really cool soft light and available light there. Again, I like that, you know, if this were my f2.0, the 90mm, the background would be pretty much obliterated. Certainly if this was a 56, getting toward 1.2, the background would just be gone. I like that there's a little bit of context here, a little bit of environment. And so, again, too sharp for a portrait lens? I don't think so. It is quite sharp. You can see the glitter on her eyelids here. What I do in an image like this, there's a couple of quick things I do. If you watched my videos, you may have seen this. If not, here's what I typically do. I like to see straight lines typically, even though I lose a little bit of the model's head. This gives me, I think, a little better look, so those roughly straight lines. And then again, what I often will do is a little bit of this accent AI filter will just provide some nice effect, I think. Sometimes a little bit of clarity. Now you see the effect this has had on the skin. It's not flattering on the skin. So there's two approaches. You can either come in and brush that away. See my previous video for an example of that. I think one on portraits I did. Or just sort of obscure it all with the structure control here. and again, paint the structure filter in just on the model's skin, and you'll get generally a very pleasing effect. We're just doing this very quickly for the sake of time. And leave the eyes alone, but try to work the skin the best you can in that fashion. And if that's too much, back it off just a little bit. If that's too little, just keep tweaking it. This is art. There's no hard and fast rules, so use what works for you. And I think that works out quite nicely. So again, second example, 80mm, right there in the middle of Times Square. I think it makes for an outstanding portrait sort of lens for that sort of environment. Here's yet another example, if I remember correctly. Yep, one other. And again, this one I think I've already processed a bit. Yep, I've already processed it just a bit. I have a couple of layers, so as a quick recap, in Luminar you have sort of the base image layer, of course. Then I applied some skin smoothing, and then a little bit of extra vibrance on the lips. So here's the image as shot, and very sharp, very crisp. But then I've toned it down rather aggressively to create a more artsy kind of look. This may not be the look you prefer, but that's what I wanted for this particular image. Now, I referred earlier to potential caveats with this lens. Let's take a look. You will see spirals in the bokeh sometimes, and that's generally referred to as onion skin bokeh, so you will see some of that. Doesn't bother me too much. Nobody seems to notice or really care except me. So, but if that bothers you, be aware of it. You will not find that in the 90mm. I don't think you'll see that in the 56mm as well. I don't know if you'll see it in the 50mm or not. Probably not, would be my guess, but you do see it in the 80mm. It has to do with the aspherical lens element. There's the way they make those, the manufacturing process leaves tiny, tiny little imperfections, ridges, and those do show up sometimes. Okay, some other quick examples. I'm just trying to give you a feel of what's possible with this lens as a portrait type lens. Here was the other model I used for the evening. Fabulous look and just great results. Let's get positioned here. I always try to focus on the eye. Very nice and sharp. Again, we're using available lighting, relatively slow shutter speed, so there's always a potential for a little bit of movement from the model. But usually in male models, we prefer a little grittier look, less skin smoothing, if any. And so these I've done none. I'll just show you these raw as they are. I say raw. These are not raw files. Actually, I find the JPEG files work really fantastic for this kind of work. I shoot RAW and JPEG. Often I end up using the JPEG file directly. Again, in an image like this, here's typical adjustment I'll make. Crop a little bit because since I've got a straight line, something that should be straight, the edge of the bricks, I really want it straight unless I am going for a different kind of look. I'll often use a little bit of this AI filter to boost the image just a little bit, not too much. And then what I noticed is what we had here was a panel, an illuminated panel just to the model's left. And I do like the effect of the light, but sometimes I want to tone that down just a little bit. So I'll use the tone filter and come here to highlights. And you'll see that drop just a little bit. I'm just trying to, and sometimes even drop the whites just a little bit. And depending on your taste, that can be useful. Again, with this lens, what I like is there's a little bit of context. There's an office building back here. There is some sort of vehicle back here with lights, brake lights basically. I like that bit of context, if you will. A 90 or the 56 could completely obliterate the background. I don't think it'd be as compelling of an image. I like this nighttime portrait on the street, available light kind of imagery, and it works well for me. Let's look at a couple others, and then we'll bring the video to a close. Here's just a very similar one. You see the lighting on the side of the face. If that's something you would adjust, you can crank down the highlights just a bit, sometimes even drop the blacks. Sometimes you can play with the shadows just a bit to get just a little better look. Again, you've got nice bokeh. Yes, as it gets to the edges, it's more of this sort of cat eye or football, somebody might say. And yes, You will find some spirals in there, some onion skin kind of bokeh. I think what you could do if that troubled you, and using something like Luminar, I think a pretty quick fix, you could drop the structure, and you would want to paint it into the background area perhaps, but that would tone down somewhat the spirals. It won't get rid of it completely, but that's an option. Okay, let's see a couple other quick ones. Again, 80mm, all these 80mm, you'll see very, very sharp, every little skin detail. Again, if that's too much for you, I'd rather have the choice to keep that or to get rid of it. And with the structure tool in Luminar, the paintbrush, if I can get it to work there we go, and I can choose to tone that down to the extent that I want it toned down and tune it. So for me, I'd rather have that option. And again, let's get rid of the tool, and you can see at 100% where we are with that skin smoothing. Here it is originally, here it is toned down just a bit, back and forth. So obviously you can do as you wish. Let's see if I've got another couple of examples. There's just another one for you. Again, the optical image stabilization makes it fantastic for this kind of work where you don't want to be hobbled by a tripod or even a monopod, but just moving quickly, sort of run and gun, available light portraits. One more, and this one I like a lot. It has a very cinematic kind of feel. In general, that's what I like to go for anyways, a bit of a cinematic feel, the feeling that these could be even just captures from some sort of a movie set. But in this case, we had moved positions. This is over in the Dumbo area. In fact, all these of this model were from the Dumbo area of Brooklyn. We moved over closer to the water. You've got a view of the skyline of the city. And again, with this lens, f2.8, because it does not completely obliterate the background, but rather preserves it somewhat, I like that for this kind of image because I can tell this is Freedom Tower in the background. So I like the way it's presented somewhat artistically in the form of bokeh. These are the lights on the cable spans for the Brooklyn Bridge, for some of those structures of the Brooklyn Bridge. This is another building. So for me, if I had done this with my 90mm, first of all, I would need a monopod or a tripod, and the model would have to be extra still. Or if I'd done it with 56, I could have gotten by with a faster shutter speed. But at those lower f-stops, I would lose a lot of this background. And in this case, I want a little bit of background to tell the story. So a very similar way of editing on an image like this. You can see with the Accent AI filter, if I go too high on it, I'll start to introduce some noise into the image. And partly this was a dark area, so this was ISO 5000. This is an image where I probably would go back to the raw file if I needed to do much with it, otherwise I'll pick up some noise. But you might also add just a touch of clarity and then come back and do a little skin smoothing if you felt that was necessary. So anyway, that's a quick review / demonstration, if you will, of some real-life images. The Fujifilm XF80mm, the 2.8, optical image stabilization. So as a quick recap, you know, if you have perfect light, indoor studio, you don't have much space, the 56 is going to be a great lens. Probably the 50 will be sufficient as well. If you've got more space, if you're outside for portrait work, the 90mm is awesome. Just really great lens, very, very sharp. f2.0, totally obliterate the background, really nice. If, however, your portrait work is in less than ideal circumstances with less than perfect lighting, and you can really use that optical image stabilization, and you really like the sharpness of the lens, and you're willing to potentially tone it down a little bit in your post-processing work, which, if you use something like Luminar, is really quick and easy, then the 80mm is a great lens. It's just very versatile and very capable. And if you like a little macro work, you can throw that in as well. So anyway, hope that helps just a bit on two fronts, as a review of the 80mm lens, and number two, for a few more quick editing techniques from Luminar and their 2018 product. So I hope this helps just a bit, and hope you have a fantastic day and a great New Year's. Happy New Year to you. I didn't say that at the start of the video, but Happy New Year's to everybody. Take care. Thanks. Bye.